Other than Tesla and the Chinese automakers, there's an even bigger problem for legacy auto. They call it peak auto. New car sales have hit their peak in the US, Europe, and Japan. Despite strong population growth in the US, the percentage of people buying new cars have dramatically fallen and are the same as they were a quarter of a century ago. This is why you see automakers desperately trying to sell subscriptions to boost margins. Only Tesla and a select few others with their disruptive business model will likely survive this new reality. We have Jeff Lutz joining us today. Jeff is an ex-supply chain executive and chief quality officer at many Fortune 100 companies. He actually has his own consulting firm right now. Welcome, Jeff.
Yeah, great to be with you, Herbert. This is a really fun topic, and it really gets to a lot of what's going on from a supply-based perspective and from an economics perspective. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
I wouldn't call it fun. My perspective, it's not fun. This is kind of dangerous for the auto industry, but I think what you need to explain to me is how Tesla might navigate through this. And of course they are, right? It's not affecting them, it's affecting the other legacy. So it looks like we've hit peak auto. This Autoline video, I'll play it first, and then you can tell me when to stop and then react to that, and then we'll play a second part of it.
Yep.
Hi, John McElroy here, talking all things automotive. You know, the auto industry faces many challenges, but its biggest problem is it's no longer growing. Yeah, sure, there are certain vehicle segments and several geographic regions where growth is good, but overall we've hit peak auto, where new car sales will likely stay stuck where they are from here on out. This is especially true in Western Europe, North America, and Japan. New car sales in each of these regions are now lower than they were a decade ago. Even total global sales are lower than they were a decade ago, despite China's massive growth. And while the COVID pandemic and chip shortage played a big role in that drop in sales, the trend lines were worrying well before COVID hit. The US market's a perfect example of this. While the numbers fluctuate from year to year, reflecting recessions and boom times, the orange line on this chart shows a long-term decline in the percentage of Americans who buy new cars.
Hey,
By
Herbert.
the way, the peak was in...
Yeah, we can pause it here. I don't know if you have the ability to put the graph up or not, but this is the fundamental issue and the fundamental challenge is that that orange line has been in a long-term trend decline for a number of years, and that percent on the left is basically every year, every discrete year, the percent of Americans that are buying a new vehicle. And there's a number of things that have happened, and I think John will get into it. John McElroy is great, by the way, an Autoline, and I think there's a number of things that could be impacting this, but really the key takeaway is once you have an industry that's at kind of hit a peak maximum, like a peak local maximum, this maximum, this has lasted, probably it's going to probably last north of a decade. Once you reach that, you've got to pivot or you're going to die, and I think that's the concept that we want to kind of discuss throughout the rest of this video, is that the pivot was actually to figuring out EVs, which are growing at a rapid pace than the rest of total auto. The rest of total auto is in a long-term decline. But if you look at EVs, they're at a significant growth trajectory. And then merging the two things together is, can you get the problem with EVs all along has been its cost structure. So if you can get industry leading, best-in-class cost structure and EV married together, that's that powerful connection or combination of those two is what would carry you forward. And I kind of look at these stages of Tesla of both just coming out with EV and making it mainstream with the S and X, and then eventually the 3 and Y. And I think we're about to hit this next stage. So, but once an industry hits a peak, you've ultimately have to pivot. And what's happened with the rest of auto up to this point is they've essentially just raised prices over a number of years, and that only works for so long. So we can continue.
1978, when the highest percentage of Americans bought a new vehicle, and it's been a long downward slide ever since. If the same percentage of Americans bought a new car in 2019 as they did in the year 2000, the sales rate would have been 20 million vehicles, not the 17 million that were actually sold. I'm using 2019 because that was the last good sales year before COVID hit. Or stated another way, millions of households dropped out of the new car market over the last 20 years. The only thing that's kept car sales from sliding further is population growth. The US population grew by 53 million people from 2000 to 2023, and yet car sales are lower now than they were back then. 53 million more people and car sales are lower. Are you starting to get the picture? Fewer households are buying new cars because the prices of new cars have stretched beyond their reach. Plus, cars last so much longer these days that people can hold on to them longer, which is why the average age of a new vehicle in the US, 12 and a half years and growing, is at all-time highs. Historically, it always took about 25 weeks of income for the average American household to buy a new car. Right now, the mean household income in the US is about $75,000, meaning those households can afford a $36,000 vehicle. But the average new car costs about $48,000, which is 25 weeks of income for a household that earns about $100,000 a year, well above the average household. This leaves the auto industry with stark choices. It can get down on its knees and pray that household income miraculously starts growing much faster, or it can figure out a way to slash costs to make cars more affordable. At the same time,
on this, so he went through a number of different things. So he went through a number of things: pricing going up and product lasting longer. And we saw this in the whole growth of smartphone as well. From 2007, 2008, when smartphones really emerged on the scene from iOS and Android, the rough turnover rate was about a year. What we were seeing for people that were just continually turning them over, and the cost structure back then, remember, of phones was in a few $100 range, and then the reliability and capability improved, where it wasn't so much of a hardware, so many steps in hardware improvement every year. Was actually in the applications and services that were on the phone, which prior versions of hardware could access and used. And so what happens when you combine that together, you combine the price of smartphones essentially doubling over this time period as well. And now people are hanging on to them for a couple of years. And we've seen that happen. And that's really helped, or really drove the kind of the local maximum being reached in smartphones as well. It took a number of years for that to happen, but it's essentially happened. The same thing here could be happening in auto with, again, the growth in pricing of vehicles over that time period, called that last 20-year time period, but definitely over the last, even just take pre-COVID to now, that maximum in the U.S., that was 17 million vehicle sales in I believe he called out 2017 to 2019. And in this year, the SAR is predicted to be, I think, 15.7 million units. And, in a couple of years prior, they were in the 13 to 14 million range, and that was supply constrained. So you've had noise in the system of what drove car sales to increase last year in the U.S. increased like 10 to 12%. There were supply constraints from COVID 21, 22, and that helped to allow them to also increase prices during that same time period. But now, again, when you've reached peak production, it's really difficult to get those efficiencies out and improve the cost structure unless you fundamentally change how the vehicle is designed and how the vehicle is put together. How the vehicle is designed is really around simplicity, part removal, combining parts. Can you fundamentally change the approach to design? And then can you fundamentally change the capital efficiency and labor efficiency involved in making the vehicle? And that's where it's going to get into next in this video is, there's a couple of companies that are going after various different approaches, Tesla being one of them, and we're going to hear about them in a bit. So why don't we play that, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Yeah, I want to show your post on X though, because I thought it was pretty good. Yeah. Basically, you're saying that if you hadn't already started acting now, you're I'll use your own words here, you're effed. So you say this: if you haven't run a new play before an industry reaches a local maximum, which we already saw, you're effed. Tesla has already done this, right? They're leading the original EV pivot, right? Which is the one that's still growing. That's why it's clear here that it's not going to be Tesla that's going to be affected by this or other players. Then the 3&Y, and it's now going to be more squarely faced off with the ICE vehicles, because especially with the $25,000 unboxed value per dollars, everything. And then you'll see here that there's other players, even Toyota. So surprisingly, Toyota is already working on value for dollar, which is their culture. So we'll see who survives. Let's watch a little bit more of this video.
Find new sources of revenue. And that's exactly what the auto industry is struggling with right now. Tesla's unboxed assembly process, Ford's EV Skunk Works program, and Toyota's BEV factory are all about slashing costs dramatically. And the lessons from these projects don't only have to apply to EVs, they could work perfectly well in slashing the cost of ICE vehicles too. But all these efforts are still several years away from going into production, assuming that they'll even work. This is why you're hearing automakers talk so much about generating new revenue from subscription services. But they don't seem to know exactly how to go about doing this. BMW took a public whipping when it tried to charge customers a monthly fee just to use their heated seats. And yet Tesla, Ford, and GM seem to be having more success charging subscriptions for their hands-free driving systems. Here's the key. Automakers can successfully charge for services, but only if they're very compelling to customers and are only available in their cars, not on their phones or other devices. You know, I've seen presentations on potential subscription services in cars that involve searching and paying for hotels or restaurants or concerts, sporting events, and things like that. But I don't see customers paying to have a feature in their car that they can already get for free on their phone. You know, we saw a similar mistake in the mid-1980s when cell phones first appeared. Automakers thought they could integrate cell phones into their cars and make a lot of money on them. Those early car phones cost $4,000. That's about $11,000 in today's money. But nobody wanted to pay for a phone that was parked in their garage every night, and so car phones were quickly relegated to the trash heap of history. Automakers will also be looking to leverage their expertise to get into new businesses like energy storage, robotics, autonomous ride sharing, VTOLs, and whatever else they can think of. With car volume stagnating, the only way they can grow their top lines, besides raising car prices even more, is to get into new areas of business. Peak auto poses a real threat to automakers and their suppliers. They can no longer count on volume growth to drive their business upwards. The pressure to cut costs will only intensify from its already intensive levels. And there's going to be a frantic search for that killer app that people will pay for in their cars. You know, this industry has always been a pressure cooker, but peak auto is going to push that pressure to levels we never imagined possible.
It's almost like Elon predicted all of this. He knew not just to create an electric vehicle, he knew to create a new business model, additional revenue streams through different margins. He got into insurance. They're doing the whole entertainment system. And of course, they're doing full self-driving, which is, again, going to completely change the game. And then they're continuing reliance on cost margins reduction.
Yeah, sorry. They have a lot of shots on goal is a term I like to use. And just re-engineering how a vehicle is made is going to, I mean, it could move significant market share over to Tesla. Because I think people may be underestimating the feature value trade-off of a $25,000 Tesla. I think the $25,000 Tesla is going to look and function as well as maybe better than a 3 or Y. We'll see. We'll see what the trade-offs ultimately are. But I think Tesla's dramatic approach to how the product is designed, you know, in terms of reducing part count and how it's manufactured with this, you know, this is probably taking a bulk of the schedule time is designing the manufacturing systems and solutions, specifically the tooling and the robotics to do unbox. I think that's taking a majority of the time right now in the schedule to marry those elements and the design elements together. This whole project is how can you maximize the feature count and capability in a vehicle, but dramatically take its cost structure down. And I think when they get this combination right, I think it's being highly underestimated how powerful it will be. And again, look, you already have the Model 3 and the Model Y essentially destroying anything in its price tier. Every time it enters a region, anytime it enters a specific marketplace at its price point, it outsells everything around it. Now, and it's outselling, you know, the $25,000 Corolla and other lower cost vehicles today. Imagine what the $25,000 vehicle is going to be able to do. I don't think there's going to be a significant amount of trade-offs from a consumer perspective. I think it's going to be a fantastic product. And Tesla's going to focus on what the consumer doesn't see, which is part count reduction, assembly process changes, and basically re-engineering, re-architecting how a vehicle comes together. Consumer doesn't care. They want it to be reliable. They want the build quality to be great. And they want the features they want, and however it gets to them, and they want the right price point. They want those things together. And once you figure that out, it's it can be game over for others. But Tesla's got a lot of execution they've got to do between now and then to get to that point. But John brought up a number of other topics around subscription services. Again, Tesla's been ahead on this topic as well. Real meaningful subscription services that people will want to use. Like I have the entertainment subscription service right now in my Teslas. I find it very useful. The satellite maps, the entertainment that's in the vehicle. I find it all to be very useful and a very low price. Now step that up to FSD and the various, there could be a number of different approaches Tesla takes to charging for FSD. Right now, they've started with everything being up front. Then they came up with a subscription model. And who knows, they may come up with other models that could be shorter time duration or per mile based usage. And it could be very compelling for consumers. They've already got your credit card information for supercharging use, so they can make this very seamless for consumers as well. So Tesla, I think, is really ahead in terms of meaningful SaaS, software as a service revenue that could come from the vehicle. Who knows what could happen with Starlink in the future? There's all these different opportunities for how, Musk businesses working together could really help the vehicle. And finally, again, this is really about an industry that's reached a peak maximum. That capacity still, unless it's been deprecated, that capacity is still out there. It's an anchor. It's weighing on suppliers. It's weighing on all the. If you, I don't know if anybody ever noticed this, but during the strikes in Q4 of last year, the auto strikes, how many factories were involved? There's just dozens of factories all over the U.S. for these automakers. They've split up and bifurcated how the vehicle's manufactured and where all the various pieces are done. And it's just going to be interesting to see from an efficiency perspective how that essentially has to go out the window. And you're going to have this end-to-end, very high-speed operation to build a vehicle, a highly featured, highly functional vehicle, which will be the Tesla Unboxed model. By the way, I think Toyota's working on, kind of their own version of this. I think if any other auto vehicle maker is going to survive this and thrive, it's going to be them and probably some of the Chinese. Toyota has a very, very strong supply base, and they have a very strong methodology in simplicity and in process reduction, and those will bode very well for them. But I think some of the Chinese automakers may do okay as well. But I think Tesla's in a very good position. Ford has said they've started a Skunk Works program, but they've got a number of years in front of them. They have to change how they design a vehicle, which components of the vehicle are designed in-house versus farmed out to supplier. Right now, they're in an 80-20 mode of 80% of stuff being done on the outside and 20% being done inside. That's not only the manufacturing effort, that's how they engineer as well. So they have to re-architect how they engineer. They have to hire these people, bring them up, they re-architect how they engineer a vehicle, and then they've got to build up a supply chain. You're talking about a number of years to be able to do this. And this is the work that Tesla's been doing over the last 10 to 15 years, building up to this point. So a lot to look forward to, a lot of work for the other automakers. But this is going to be exciting to see the industry take this next jump over the next couple of years.
Yeah, this is why it's kind of interesting that this is the time we're hearing the legacy auto delay their electric vehicle production. Earlier in the show, Autoline, he talks about how the percentage of people buying new autos has fallen, but also primarily because they can't afford it. And then Here you have the legacy auto, dropping the electric vehicles when it's the actual electric vehicles that it's the cost per mile that's more effective. And so I wanted to share this, which is something you wanted to talk about as well. Oops, here we go. So, the news this morning was that just over 10,000 of the cars used by Uber and Lyft in New York City are now electric. That's 12% of the total fleet of the two ride-hailing companies. So already Uber and Lyft, 12% of all their cars are electric. This means that drive transition in both fleets is happening faster than expected. So you replied saying, cabs and Ubers are always going to go for the lowest cost per mile. And of course, electric vehicle is that. But it's proof that Hertz, when they back down saying that they're going to stop buying as many electric vehicles, it's because they overbought versus the fact that EVs are not the right move. So that's a good point. Yeah. So clearly EVs are the lowest cost per mile.
Yeah, and the Hertz CEO, and I wanted to make this point because this has been painted one way in the media of like, EVs are too expensive to deal with. There are all these different problems, and they kind of made that be the headline for Hertz. But when the Hertz CEO actually got on TV, he said, "Look, this is going to happen. Like this transition to EV is going to happen. Essentially said we just bought too many at one point in time. And by the way, they bought at the peak from a cost perspective or from a pricing perspective. So they had a kind of a double whammy happening, but they essentially bought too many vehicles, so then they have to scale back, because if you buy too much, just like any capex exercise, and you're underutilizing your fleet, or you're underutilizing your capex, your cost structure is going to go through the roof. So that's not to say that there aren't other issues. There aren't issues there may have been turnaround time with who knows, there may have been other issues, but to me, the headline there was they bought too many vehicles. And this Uber Lyft cab story to me is really telling this story. And anybody I've talked to in Uber as well says, that drives an Uber, just like, look, everything comes down to cost per mile. And they study these things in detail. They study how long their tires last. They study, how much energy and how much charging, cost they're actually using versus gasoline. They study all these things. They understand that there's essentially lower maintenance with an EV. So they are very, very cost conscious, cost per mile conscious. And to see the fleet, basically, it's, one out of every, I guess 8 cars or so has already changed over. In New York City, it's one of the most difficult cab markets or difficult ride hailing markets to in terms of being rough on vehicles, probably in the world. And to see that kind of changeover in that fleet, to me, is really telling that the cost per mile piece has really been solved for. And that's just in the 3 and Y. Imagine when it gets down to the 25K vehicle. To me, it's going to be, game over. And all these vehicles I think this is the transition to robotaxi. It's going to be through this realization in the ride hailing fleet of like the cost per mile piece is superior with human supervised driving today. It's already a better solution. I think this is going to be the pathway for robotaxi in the future.
So several headwinds for auto, but it's a good news that Tesla looks like that they're not only leading right now, they're not being affected as much based on the information we shared today, but also they're leading in subscriptions, lower costs to produce cars with a higher margin, with new processes like the unbox model. They've got, and then they've got the Holy Grail is going to be robotaxi, where if you have robotaxi, because people don't want to buy new cars anymore anyways, or it's falling, that will solve the whole thing. So looks like we're good, doing the right thing following Tesla. Thank you so much, Jeff. Follow him on his X account at the Jeff Lutz. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.